Welcome to these Travel Times talks here at the Adventure Overland Show 2017. These are brought to you in partnership with Rimmer Brothers, who have a vast array of aftermarket OEM and genuine parts for all Land Rover vehicles at competitive prices. More importantly to you guys, they will deliver them all around the world fast. So if you've any problems, these are the places to come to. There's now a brand new accessories catalogue out with a comprehensive range of Land Rover vehicles, from Range Rover Classics up to, well, vehicles of today. There's also the popular parts catalogue, and this is a great accessory to put in your glove box. For more details, do visit the website at rimmerbrothers.co.uk. Enjoy the talk.
Good evening. Thanks for coming. And I'm very pleased to see such good turnout. So shall I use this? Can you hear me all right? I tend to sort of wander around and wave my arms around. Can you still hear me if I do that? Yeah. Well, you're deaf. If those at the back want to come forward, so I prefer to sort of walk around like an Italian and wave my arms around. I'll probably be doing that. But I've done talks here since it began, basically, but they've usually been on some trip that I've done, but this year I haven't actually done any trips for various reasons. So I thought, well, Tom said, come and do a talk, So I thought, I know, I'll talk about the 1948 Land Rover that I've owned since I was 19. And I'm hearing it this weekend as well. So it's been in sort of fairly regular use. And of course I now have the benefit of hindsight, having used it, and realise what a pivotal moment in life it was when I bought it. You know, at the time it was just a friend of mine, Steve, at college had a 1948 Land Rover, and I'd had an 86-inch, which I'd bought and sold, and I thought, well, I quite fancy another one, and I really wanted a 1948 one, which in 1973 was a bit odd, really. It was only Steve and I had them, and his was chassis number 248, which he didn't really appreciate at the time, and he paid 47 quid for it, with 6 months road tax and half a tank of petrol. So in fact, it cost him maybe 25 quid. Mine was a little more at 85 quid some months later. But Steve's was all original and had the lights behind the grille front panel. Mine didn't. Mine actually came with a later one with two 7-inch headlights. Anyway, this was the early days, and this perhaps explains why the first chassis did rust through quite quickly. We used to go and play up in Borth in North Wales and drive through the sea. Anyway, cast your mind back to 1973. I went into the bank as a student in my second year. Matt was a baby at the time, and I knew I didn't have any money. Now, not much has changed. I went and wrote out a cheque, which you did then pay cash, and I probably took £100 because I had to get the train to London to pick it up. And I thought, the person behind the counter will say, "I'm sorry, Mr. Savage, you haven't got enough money." She didn't, right? She just handed over. "Would you like it in 10s or 20s? I thought, anything, you know. Ran out of the bank, caught the train to London, bought it off Mr. Tuck. And that was 29th of March, 1973. Drove it back to Salisbury, where I was at college, and I remember it was incredibly cold that night, and I had to sort of peel my fingers off the steering wheel and then try and turn the light switch off, and it was the original one, but the bit that gives you some leverage had broken off, so you couldn't really grip it, but happy days. Then I got in touch with Rover 20 years later, and found that it was, I knew it was chassis number 861117, but it had left the factory on the 3rd of December and gone to Henley's in London. Now, from Henley's in London, it somehow made its way over to Cornwall, and sadly, I didn't get the old buff logbook with it. It came with this logbook, with me at the bottom there in April 73, and then it was in Essex, and then Essex before that, and then before that, Truro. So it had got from London to Truro, and I'm missing 19 years of its history, which is, it doesn't matter, but it would have been lovely to have had the original logbook. Anyway, Maurice Walter Harbour, who owned it in the 60s, Will and I were on a support ride in Switzerland, supporting some cyclists in minis, and we were stood at the top of the Furka Pass, and I got an email, and it said, "I've just found that you own my father's old Land Rover. My name's Rick Harbour." And I said, Yeah, and he found some article I'd written, and there was a reference to his dad, and contacted me. And we've become in contact quite regularly now, but he's a nice bloke. And I said, I'd love to come down to Truro and do a picture with you and your dad. And he said, well, Dad's 90, and he's not too well. I said, well, fair enough. And he said, and I live in Canada. So I said, oh, okay, that's that then. But then he sent me a picture, when his dad died, sadly, last year, he sent me this picture of his younger sister with the Land Rover that's parked here in 1966, 67, whatever. And I said, oh, can I use it in an article? So I'm thinking of writing an article for Classic Land Rover about 44 years of ownership. And I emailed him, and I didn't get a reply. And then, like an hour later, she phoned me up. Said, hello, it's Sally Harbour here. And I said, oh, hello, I'm the girl in the picture. And I said, well, how about we recreate it? She said, yeah, okay, I'm in Truro. And I thought, shit, I've got to drive the thing to Truro, which I hope to do in a couple of weeks' time. But she sounds great fun and is well up for recreating this shot. So that, the purists, the Series 1 purists will notice that it's got the old style tilt with two windows, which was gone by the time I had it. And it also had a seat in the back here, and that too was gone and still is. So, it's changed a bit even since 1967. Then somebody sent me this letter which they'd found relating to the same Land Rover about a leak in the oil, an oil leak in the gearbox. Well, there's a surprise, and what they would do if the owner took it back to the factory. And this again was down in Cornwall. And I showed this to the dealer in Leicester, where I live, so Robin Sturgis. I said, hey, Robin, look, I've got this letter. And he read it, and he said, that's almost exactly the same as the one we still send out. Anyway, I finished college, and we lived up in Leicestershire on a big rambling farmhouse. So it found its way up there. And then, of course, I took it to bits, as one does, to rebuild it, which in fact meant just wire brushing it and painting it with some new black paint. And I find it hard to believe, but I think that must be me. And I don't remember ever looking like that, because it's not you. You're much younger than that. I do remember I had some lederhosen, which we bought on holiday in Austria. And they're struggling to fit by then. I was 12 when we bought them, so it must be me. And I'd taken the thing to bits, and there's my brother's Austin 7 Special there, and roof off his Sunbeam Alpine. And bit by bit, I put it back together. And this was our life in the late 70s. We lived on this big farmhouse, and we had loads of old knackers. And there's my brother's XRF 80-inch there, 1952 one, an old VW. My pal John is working on a Daimler 250 V8 there. And then there was my Land Rover, being me pretending to rebuild it. Then this came up for sale. I bought the proper grille for £5 from a chap in Birmingham, and I did that photograph to send to my pal Steve T, because he got one and I hadn't. So just to get him, I thought, right, I've got one now. But you see, I don't look anything like I do in that other picture, do I? I don't know who that was. I'm sure it wasn't me. Anyway, I sent him that photo.
Nice flares.
Yeah. Well, we all wore flares then. And I bought a Rover 60 for the engine as well. I think my mate took me down to Watford, and the Rover 60 was roadworthy, so it was about £50, and drove it back. And it was just a lovely car. It was a beautiful engine and all comfortable leather seats. And of course, I took the engine out, scrapped it, so just had the engine, because a Rover 60 engine was what you had to compete in trials. And at that time, I'd got a job. Two of the guys that I worked with had Land Rovers and did trials with the Peak and Dukeries Land Rover Club. And I thought, this sounds fun. So I rapidly finished off the bodged up rebuild, and off we went. So that's possibly first trial with the P&D, no roll cage. The tyres were on it when I bought it, I think, and that's my dad hanging on for dear life, pretending to be enthusiastic. And this would have been about 1974, probably. Then in 75, Peak and Dukeries hosted the National Rally, at Ashover in Derbyshire, and I entered because by then I'd been in the club a year, and it was the roll cage I had. You can just see it there, roll bar. You know, outside schools they used to have a bar set in the pavement to stop the kids running under cars. It's one of those. It was cheap. Anyway, Steve came up. The whole thing was cheap. It was £12 to enter a trial then. Steve came up and we camped together, and so I was in mine with Matt's mum, and Steve came up with a friend of his in GTM 228, his. And this was at the end. We were all packed up and ready to go home. Now, as a tale of two Land Rovers, mine, the number plate's on my car, so it's UVS 203 now. But Steve's is still GTM 228, but I bought it off him. No, he sold it to a friend of his at work in the late 70s. I bought it in about 1982 for, I think, £200. And then I had it in the barn at the farm and sold it for £500 to a chap who restored it, Ivor Ramsden, his name was. Then he moved it on to, this is GTM, not mine. He moved it on to someone else, and it ended up with the noted Series 1 restorer Ken Wheelwright, who restored it, no expense spared. And it last changed hands for 80,000. And it featured in an Australian TV advert on the beach in Anglesey. And I'm in touch with the guy who owns that as well. He's up in Lancashire. And one day we'll do a picture of the pair of them together again. So GTM is now totally unrecognisable from what it was. Now at that national in 1975, there was a friend of mine at the time, John Hicks, who I worked with as well, in his mine. I think we entered a team recovery event at Ashover, and I can't remember how well we did, probably abysmally. So there was the trial, the comp safari, and the team recovery. And bearing in mind, we drove all these home again afterwards, and that was me in the trial probably. Now these photographs, these last two colour ones, I'd never seen. And Emrys Kirby, who also writes for Classic Land Rover, he sent me an email saying, I've just seen some pictures of you on eBay. I said, you're kidding. Why? And he said, he sent me a scan of them, and he said there's about 25 from that event. I said, well, we ought to have them, oughtn't we? He said, yeah, okay. So he bid £50. I gave him the £50, and I've got them, and I've scanned them all. And I showed them to Steve, who, you know, we're still in regular touch. I said, Steve, are these pictures come up of me and you in 75? He said, Willie took them. I've got the rest. And I said, you're kidding. So Emrys contacted the guy who was selling them and said, just out of interest, where did you get them from? He said, I bought them in a charity shop. So what had happened, and this is Willie actually taking them, right, I took that. So Willie was taking them on that camera. One of his many bitter and twisted ex-wives had taken them to the charity shop because Willie died about 6 years ago. So she had a clear out of all of his rubbish and took them to the charity shop. Somebody bought them and put them on eBay. So it's gone full circle, and there's the great man taking them. He was at art college with us doing photography, and then he went on and joined the army, served in the Falklands, and was Lieutenant Colonel Willie McCracken, MBE, and Military Cross when he finished, and then he died of alcohol, as did many. Anyway, Steve and I in the comp safari, which we entered at that national rally. Now someone else took that. With some ex-military goggles, the school playground roll cage, and it was a fantastic course, but sadly we didn't finish it because we ran out of petrol, which was a bit of an oversight. Having done the trial before, I'd forgotten to put any more in. But I did a lot of trials. I probably did 3 years of trials with the P&D, which was good fun, you know. And I had most of the times I didn't do very well, but because there were some very good drivers there. But I did win the Bill Hopkinson Shield for a comp safari once, and that was its last outing for them. Because you know, each time you come back, drive it there, drive it back, it got pretty bashed about really, because it had quite a hard life back then. And it was, for the first couple of years, it was my daily driver as well. So Matt grew up in a pushchair in the back of it, didn't you? And yeah.
I thought that last picture was Matt.
No, that's me. That's me looking very muddy. But, you know, we enjoyed some considerable success in it. And I'd still do that now, and if given half a chance. There's one, there's a couple of last trialling pictures, but these are more about the people. So just make a mental note of this character here. This is Lee Hooper, who I started working with in 1974. And we worked for a company that had a newspaper, so we wangled that I could get this trial on expenses by taking photographs of it for the company newspaper, which he wrote. And then this is classic Land Rover legend Tony Sinclair in the passenger seat of mine in the 70s as well, when both of us had hair. It's gone now. And then some of the guys, all these pictures are propping up now on there's a Facebook page called Old Trialers or something, isn't there? And all these pictures are coming to light. So that's John Bailey, who was the other chap at the place I worked. And that Land Rover had been his dad's from new as part of his dad's job at Wicksteed Park. And then John got it and put a roll cage in it and did all sorts. And we sort of wonder whether the current owner of Dud 936 is fully aware of its past, but because it's another one. I think it does spoil them a bit, doesn't it? You know, it's not the same thing, is it? Anyway, I can't believe how thin I am there, but you know, it was starting to become troublesome. It had had 3 years of quite hard trialling use. I tipped it over in the woods somewhere as well. You can see the oil pouring out across the wing. And that wing is still slightly bent down, actually. Plus, you know, I was using it for towing stuff. Had this horrible homemade hardtop, which I picked up for very cheaply somewhere. And it made it extremely noisy. Plus, it was our holiday car, you know, so we'd clear off to a wet and miserable Wales and spend a few weeks towing cars off the beach, actually, and making a bit of money. But it was the daily user. It was my work car, trials car, holiday car. And then it got, so I couldn't drive it anymore on the road because it wasn't MOT'd, so it went on a trailer behind another cheap 80-inch I bought. And then after that period, it sort of lay fallow for a few years. And then while I bought a house and had my second family, Will, who's here tonight. So the next time it moved under its own steam was out of my own garage with Matt there on the right and a very young Will, 30 years ago probably, in the middle. So it ran. And it was much, I think I had actually got another chassis and had that properly welded up. Anyway, Matt had it for a bit. It was your car for a while, wasn't it? And got it stuck. There's Will trying to push it. It was still on TME and it still had the dodgy roll bar in. And that was laying out a trial. That's Pete Wilford in the background, who people may know. And you had those big bar grips on it, didn't you? So it's been the family car. That's what I mean about a pivotal moment in life buying that, because all the kids have grown up with it and driven it, and it's been their first car, and we've had a lot of fun in it. But this was my rebuild, so again, it wasn't very good. There's young Will at the wheel. Yeah. Yes, it is. Now, there's a mystery here which I don't know the answer to, because look at those seat backs there. They're fantastic. I must have bought those new, and I don't know what's happened to them, because they're not the ones that are on it now, and they weren't the ones that were on it before. I can only think I had another Land Rover that I'd painted and sold that I put those in, because I can't remember ever owning them. Then we got to your stag weekend. So this was that trial, the all-wheel drive club trial. It was just before you got married, wasn't it? Yeah. And we went and did an all-wheel drive club trial. We double entered it, and that was just getting Poppy there, taking one wheel off, Will on the other side, Matt taking the windscreen off. And I've got loads of pictures of it trialling. We did all right. That was my first trial again for probably 15 years. And then I joined the Viking 4x4 club and I became competition secretary. So I was setting out a trial at Eton Lodge with a young Will there and Matt and Poppy, my daughter. And then it probably had about 4 years of trialling with the Viking club, mainly with me driving it. And it got at all sorts of funny angles. And I just bought the Carawagon then, so that was pulling myself out. And gritting my teeth and giving it some beans up that hill. That's at Tixover. So it was good fun. I really enjoyed it. But of course, it's a fair bit of wear and tear. And I was, again, driving it to and from events. And, when you're doing this sort of thing with it, something's going to break before too long. Well, I always made it home and had sort of reasonable success with it. Got some little awards. But then it was sort of time for it to retire. And we sorted it out and it was used by the kids to Will had just passed his test. So it was, while you were doing your A-levels, you were taking it to school. So here's Will at the driver's wheel. Is that Sam?
Yeah.
Now a pilot for Jet 2.
Yeah, don't
Yeah. And that's the guitarist, the fellow songwriter. What's his name? Lewis. I saw him last week. He looks like an old man.
He looks boring.
Yeah. Yeah. So this was for when Land Rover ran a 50th birthday of the Land Rover event, and you entered a competition. Anyway, the thing was knackered again, so we thought, I know, we'll rebuild it. So it went into our garage at home, and Will posed for the lifting the engine out shot, or putting the engine in, or whatever. And the chassis was good. I'd had a proper roll cage made, so these are the mounts for the roll cage here. And it was good, but we were working, we had stuff to do, and quite by chance, Matt had started a business doing Land Rovers. So off it went to the Matt Savage barn, and it had been like that for about 2 years probably, and then within a couple of months Barry had done it, hadn't he? Just everything happened. I bought a winch off Tony Sinclair off a Series 2, and Barry put all the bits back on and connected up all the bits of wire, and we put the Series 2 axles on then, didn't we? Yeah. And then it was back on the road. So this is me, Matt, Ted and Tom are also here, two giants. And that really, that's been how that's the state it's been in since then. So that's 15 years ago. So it's been pretty good. It's been working and usable. So I thought I'd do a trip in it. It was running better than it had ever run before. But look, the seats are back to the crappy ones that are in it now. So I have a friend, Lee, who was in that earlier picture I used to work with, who'd moved to Italy and married an Italian girl. And Lee lives down here near Genoa, just in the hills, just north of Genoa there, because I live up here. So I thought, right, it's downhill, I could probably go there in about 3 days. So I thought, well, other people have done it. We were talking about this earlier. If you've got a Land Rover, you can go anywhere. So you think, Barbara Toy, she went round the world in an 80-inch and didn't have much trouble. And then the Beak family from Bath, they had this garage in Bath in 1952, and it wasn't making any money. So they thought they'd start a new life in Rhodesia, as it was called then. So they bought that. That, of course, was state-of-the-art expedition vehicle then, 1952. It was a 51 Land Rover. It was new-ish, and he was handy. So he ran this garage and was able to do all the modifications, and the thing must have weighed a ton. Plus, they took a 22-foot caravan to Southampton behind it on their way and put that on a ship. Can you imagine? 2-litre engine. They had a few problems, and Diane is the daughter, who was 10 at the time, and I'm in touch with her, and Wasn't me. So that, he knew how to fix it. They took a couple of spare springs and they mended stuff on the way. And then Adamson's, the people who did the Lions, I think the Lions ended up eating them, but they had one and came back from Nairobi in it. So there's no reason why you can't do these epic adventures as well as you've done trips to the Alps and stuff in yours. And then there's this bloke, Ken Campbell. What a man! He's one of us, isn't he? He's got to be, because he came back from Rhodesia with the screen down. And it's a typo there. It's 11,700 miles. He did in that. And big cheery smile on his face. I would love to have met him, because he looks very much our kind of person. He'd be here. There'd be a packed hall if it was him talking. Anyway, I set off for Italy. It was November. It was raining. And of course, you chucked off the ferry. I can't remember which crossing I did, but it was dark when I got off the ferry. So I got the puny crappy old behind the grille headlights, which light nothing, and two authentic 1950s Lucas spotlights, which did little else. And one's a spread beam and the other's a pencil beam. So you're following this light through the murk. And of course, by the time it got light, I could take some pictures. But it was quite challenging driving. And I found a few hills I could climb in France, and I did a little bit of gentle off-roading, making sure I could get back out again. So then I was writing about this for Land Rover World at the time. So I was aware of the fact I'd got to get some photographs of me doing it to send to Land Rover World. So they had to be quite interesting pictures. So I stayed in hotels, which was fine. Got some sort of 1948 type photographs of the Land Rover and old signage. Stopped for lunch in vineyards with my crusty bread and my bit of cheese and tomatoes. And of course, all you need, as us Series 1 owners know, is a tailgate. It's everything. It's a table, it's a chopping board. You don't need all that stuff, right? So, So, and then I took a tripod and did some night shots with it as well. And then things were going well, actually. I'd had one breakdown going around London in the rush hour on the North Circular, and some policemen helped me bump it onto the pavement. It was just the fuel pump. So I fixed that. Beauty of old things, you can fix them. And I did a little bit of gentle green laning, and then crossed the border into Italy. And of course, there's nothing there now. So this is the border between France and Italy, but there used to be a shed there probably with some blokes to stamp your passport. But now there's nothing. But I was doing well. I'd made it to Italy. This was day 3. And I just had to get to my friend's house, which is half a day's drive, I suppose, from there. Predominantly downhill as well. So I arrived there mid-afternoon, I suppose, unable to actually walk properly, because as anyone knows who's driven an 80-inch, it's not very comfortable. So you're quite close to the wheel and you're sitting bolt upright and your knees are under your chin. And my body has adapted to that driving position, but with a camera bag over my shoulder, it was a bit uncomfortable. Now, this trip to Italy has happened every year since, but in the car. Because, and you'll be pleased to hear this, I take him down a load of English beer. So he likes Marston's pedigree. So I went to Marston's and I said, look, we're doing this trip in an old Land Rover. How about a deal, So they said, oh, okay. So they gave me, I think, 48 bottles of Peddy. And we did a picture there and they put it in their company newspaper. So the Peddy got to Italy and then I sent Marston's that and they put it in the same company newspaper. But I'd gone primarily to help him bring the logs up from the valley because he lives in this gorgeous place. And I'd taken my wraps here, which is, they're not exactly sand ladders, but they do the trick in mud. Anyway, we had a pint and thought about it, because you have to, don't you really? But we'd stripped all the stuff off the Land Rover, emptied it, because the next job was for it to start earning its keep, really, because that was the story, going to help him get his logs in. So we piled all the hood sticks, hoods, spare wheel, windscreen, doors, door tops up there and stripped it down to minimum. And then in the background there, we had to go down into this valley here, and bring up a load of dead wood, which is what we did. So it was really doing what it was designed to do as a farm truck in the late 40s. And it did it admirably. You know, we had probably half a ton of logs in it, and it just did it. And the hills were pretty steep, really. So we'd go in downhill, load it up, go down to the bottom to those walnut trees, and then come back up a pretty easy route out of the woods. But the last bit up to the house was difficult, and I found it best to go up backwards and position the ramps. So the ramps were positioned just to give it the last bit to get up there. But we had 2 full days of logging, and then I'd driven it down. I sort of thought I could drive it back, but I had bought a Ryanair ticket back from Genoa to Stansted. This is in the old days when they had pilots, right? So I thought I can't be arsed. I was knackered from all this. We'd eaten well and drunk far too much. So he dropped me off at Genoa airport, and I flew home. And I just dumped it in his garden. So, it was probably dark, and no, it wasn't. It was light there. So I dumped the Land Rover in his garden and left it. And I said, look, I'll fly out next year or whatever and pick it up. So he'd send me little pictures of it, saying, it's still there, it's all right. And, they're up in the hills, so it gets bloody cold there, and it snows a lot. So it was March by the time I went out. So this was November. So it was there from November till March, standing outside in all weathers. And I phoned him up and said, how is it? He said, well, it's still there. It looks all right to me. He knows nothing about engines and stuff. So I'd left tools with it, and I flew out, and the weather was very nice, but the radiator had split. The battery was obviously flat. So I thought, well, I've got to drive it home now. So I took the radiator out, and down in the town we bought some body filler, and I found where all the holes were and filled them in with body filler. So we've got, this is gaffer tape here. Never travel without gaffer tape. And that's masking off the good bits, and then the other sections are filled in with filler. And I put it all back together again. It was all right. So the weather wasn't particularly hot, so I didn't think there'd be any problem, really. So we did a bit more, got some more wood up just to check that it all worked, and it did. We borrowed a battery charger off a farmer and charged the battery up. So I thought, it should be. I actually used the winch as well, which is one of the few times, because it was running on old Range Rover tyres, which were a bit bald. So I was ready to head home. Now, at the time, Poppy, my daughter, Will's younger sister, was working in Val Thorens, the ski chalet. And I looked at the map and thought, well, Val Thorens, it's sort of on the way. So I'd flown out with my skis and my boots, which are slung in the back here, plus some ski gear. I loaded up with Italian wine and olive oil to bring back, because it's £1 a litre, and it's good stuff. And Lee took this picture off his balcony of me about to depart, and I drove up through the vineyards of Italy. Now, the lights are usually better than that, but you have to have them on in the daytime. And what I hadn't realised was that the battery wasn't charging. So I was driving along thinking, oh, it's lovely, roof off, sunshine, saw an old Jeep, he waved at me, and I waved at him, and it was great. So northern Italy into the south of France and up. And then after a bit, it has a Fiat 500 petrol tank, so the range is only about 100 miles anyway, and there's no fuel gauge. So the deal is, it runs out, I fill it up for a gallon can. We've done this for years, haven't we? Yeah. And you carry on. And it stopped there. I thought, oh yeah, petrol, put the petrol in it. Turn the key. Bugger. And that was it, it was dead. So it was the flattest bit of road you can imagine, that was it. And it wouldn't start, and I thought, well, I could take the driver's door off, sling that in the back, and scoot it like that, jump in, whack it into second, and it'll start. But I couldn't, it was too flat, there wasn't enough, just the slightest of hill, and I could have done that. So I thought, what am I going to do? There's no RAC or anything, I wasn't in any of those. So I stood with a tow rope, just there, looking pathetic. and smiling a lot and looking stupid, which comes actually quite easily. And sure enough, within about 5 minutes, someone stopped, a Frenchman stopped, and I don't speak much French, and he didn't speak any English. I said, "Oh, bullshit." He said, "Well, we know, what do you mean?" So, with the door off, I scooted, he pushed, and sure enough, jumped it, into second, fired up, carried on. I didn't stop, I just said, "Thank you very much." And then it was going all right, but we all know how these things work. You think, well, the battery's got enough in it to power the fuel pump and the ignition, just. I probably got about 20 miles if I'm lucky. So it was starting to get quite late. I was looking for somewhere to stay. And I came into this town, it was starting to falter a bit. I thought, oh, shit. And then there was a battery depot, just there. So, bought a new battery and just swapped the batteries, and that was the end of that problem. Somebody was on my side. And then I carried on towards where I was going to meet Poppy, and got to there's a lift here on the Italian side that goes up, and over the top of that mountain is Val Thorens. So I thought, right, I'm going to be James Bond bit here. So I covered up all the wine and olive oil and stuff in the back with loads of the tilt, and it just looked like a load of shit in the back, honestly. I thought, no one's going to bother to steal it, and they didn't. And then I put all the camera and valuable stuff in a rucksack, put my ski wear on. I thought, Christ, this weighs a ton, I'm not going to be able to ski with this, but I've got to. So I caught the lift up there, and it's about 15, 20 minutes on this cable car. And there were some jabbering Italian women who didn't stop talking all the way about nothing. Anyway, I sat there thinking, I've got to ski down this bloody great mountain with all this kit. Anyway, I did it, but, oh God, I fell over loads, but I got down to the bottom, and there's Poppy to meet me. And then, of course, dumped it all, and we had a couple of days proper skiing without all the stuff. And it was beautiful, beautiful weather. And then from there, carried on up through France, and I had a bit of a kit probably, but it was mainly to take a picture for the article. Oh, this is great. We're trundling along through France, roof off, weather's perfect, doesn't get better. Then the fuel pump went again. so you can't see it on this, but there's a big pool of petrol under there. And but you see, I knew what to do. So I took the points off the SU fuel pump, cleaned them, reassembled it, put the plastic cap back on. Fine. Carried on up through the Loire Valley, and got back home. So it was actually, apart from one small breakdown and the battery problem, it was trouble-free, really, wasn't it? You could expect. It's a Land Rover, so and being so simple, I had the confidence to repair it. And then in more recent years, it's sort of in retirement, really, but we do various little outings. So, these pictures are just from the last 10 years, actually, because that trip to Italy was 13 years ago. And I've done some videos on YouTube called £10 Adventure, where we give ourselves a budget of £10 to have an adventure. And I just read in Overland Journal, the American mag, which you may be familiar with. And when that first came out, I thought, this is great. It's got some fantastic photography. It's beautifully designed. There's some great things in it. And then it started to drift off into, what Scott Brady did. I mean, Scott owns the magazine. He's a nice bloke. But it became like article after article of what he was doing. And I sort of thought, there's always one other article in it. But I sort of lost interest. So I didn't subscribe. And then the last one I got, I couldn't believe it. They had 6 or 8 pages test on tie-down equipment, ratchet straps to us. They tested and tried ratchet straps and got 8 pages out of it. I thought, that's it. I can't do it. So I thought, right, I'm going to do a £10 adventure using lorry rope from Machine Mart for £3.50. So that's perfectly adequate. So the £10 went on, obviously, a bottle of wine first, so that used up half of it, and then a fiver's worth of petrol and whatever we could scavenge out of the freezer. You got stuff in the freezer that's been there years. So we pulled all that out and found some old chicken breasts and bits and bobs. And there's some lovely lanes in Leicestershire near us, so we went out there with the dog and tied all the stuff in with the lorry rope. And I happened to know a farmer. I said, look, can we come and have a barbecue in your field? He said, only if you'll let me come down and say, oi, get off my land. So I said, okay. so he did. You know, again, the tailgate becomes everything, the work surface, the table. The dog was after the chicken, and we had a truly lovely meal for two. And actually, no, the wine was cheaper because it came from Italy. It was virtually undrinkable. But we had jacket potatoes and chicken casserole, and you know, it was good fun. And we had only spent a tenner. And then the next time was up to leave us at Pitt. No, where did we go next? We went up to North Yorkshire camping in the winter as a tryout for the Marrakesh Express, the project for which John Horn was in. And I think, were you there? You were there. Yeah, you were there. That's it. Yeah, it was bloody freezing, wasn't it? -5 or something.
How did you know you were in Bumholter?
Yeah, well, we had a Swifty. But I thought, right, I'm going to get an article out of driving mine up there. So, you know, I did. Actually, I'll confess, I saw that sign and just pulled into that gateway, did the picture, then carried on up the road. But don't tell anyone. And then, you know, we went under the motorway into the field because it just thought, you know, I could have driven bits of that. And then got up. Oh no, this was another trip. This was up. We were going green laning in North Yorkshire. That was it. So we did it, and you know, Emrys Kirby came down from where he lives. I was up from Leicester. We camped in a field and did a lovely green lane the next day. And you know, it was cold. No, this isn't that trip. The cold trip, is it? This is what you in Yorkshire called summer. So it was just cold, not freezing. And then, you know, it's got lovely views. And look, we're back with these bloody horrible seat backs as well. So, you know, that's what it's been doing for the last 4 or 5 years. And I have a plan to go down to Cornwall and visit the woman who grew up as a child with it. But it sort of proved that you don't have to have, you know, a 110 with all the gear. You can have just as much fun in this. And I'm delighted to also say there's another generation of savages who are now pushing the boundaries of economic overland travel. If I tell you there's 2 people here who bought a Volvo estate with 340,000 miles on the clock for 500 quid a couple of months ago, and joined a thing called the Oddball Rally in July, which was 8 European countries in 5 days. And within 10 miles of entering France, it broke down. So I thought, yes, great. But of course, now it's all on Facebook. So there's pictures of them buying the filler in the Carrefour and radiator being repaired in the car park and filled up with water. And then they caught up with the rest of the rally at 1:30 in the morning. And all of the cars that were in it gave problems, even some of the newer ones. So let's have a big hand for Ed Savage and Aidan Buswell, the next generation. Proving yet again, like the global convoy out there, that you don't really have to have, you don't even have to have 4-wheel drive. But so that sort of sums it up. That was, you know, 44 years compressed into just under an hour. And it has been a great influence on all of our lives, that truck. And it will stay with us unless someone nicks it tonight for the foreseeable future anyway. And it's in a way, it's a shame they're now worth so much money, because it's nice just to use it, you know, and not think about, I used to just park it in the road and no one was going to nick it, were they? Because it's horrible. But anyway, that's it. If anyone's got any questions, fire away. Great. So we can all go and have a beer now. Thank you very much.
We'll be back shortly at Adventure Overland 2017 with another Travel Times Talks. But for now, do check out any of our other videos. And of course, as always, a big thanks to Rimmer Brothers, who have partnered with us to bring you these talks. Their new popular parts catalogue is available for all Land Rover vehicles and is a great addition to your glove box. For more information, also do check out www.rimmerbrothers.co.uk.